The Son of God had just arrived on earth as a man, and the devil had to move quickly. After his cunning temptation was resisted by Jesus, Satan had no choice but to initiate his final attack against humanity's last hope. For the next 3 years, Jesus went throughout the land undoing all of Satan's hard work. He healed those suffering in sickness. He raised people from the dead, and he expelled many of Satan's demonic kin from their hosts. At his sight, the demons quaked in fear and begged not to be destroyed by him. Every exorcism was a torturous reunion between a rebellious angel and his all-powerful creator. But Satan pondered, what was the point of all this? Why had the all-powerful God, creator of the earth, subjected himself within its confines? By clothing himself in human flesh, the limitless had limited himself. Shackled by hunger, bound by space and time, and subject to exhaustion, he seemed intent on living out the authentic human experience without taking any shortcuts. It wasn't until Satan overheard Jesus speaking to his disciples about his mission on earth that the picture became a little more clear. While the disciples ignorantly dismissed the outrageous plan Jesus shared, the devil adapted his plans accordingly. God was enacting a strategy, a way to fulfill the threat of Zechariah's vision and undermine all of Satan's accusations. But the secret to his plan wasn't in a single nation or a single people. It was in a single man and a single sacrifice. Despite humanity's pitiful weakness, God was proving that this man could achieve something that none before him came close to achieving: perfection. After living the perfect life, the man would be bound to the altar as the perfect lamb, a sinless sacrifice to end all sacrifices. Satan realized that if Jesus somehow managed to carry out this mission successfully, humanity would be permanently redeemed, freed from his accusations and worthy to receive the blessings God had denied Satan in the beginning. God's justice would finally be satisfied in the slaying of his son, allowing his mercy to abound freely upon those undeserving wretches. Satan had to move, and fast. So he spoke with God one final time. Have you considered my son Jesus? There is no one on earth like him. He's blameless and upright. Have you not protected him all these years? From his birth, through his childhood, and even during his ministry. You've put a wall of safety around him. Remove your hand of protection, and let's see whether he can endure what is to come. Just like every human before him, he will ultimately let you down. Very well, God answered. The wager was on again, but with one major difference. This time, the fate of all humanity hung in the balance. God would show before all the powers and principalities that humans deserved his blessing. Or Satan would prove before all the heavenly hosts that he deserved this misplaced honor. The stakes were higher than ever. Both parties' objectives hinged on whether Jesus could do the impossible. The devil got an idea. If he could at any point get the Messiah to stumble into sin, his perfect sacrifice would be invalidated, and the final hope of redeeming humanity would be lost. If God in human form couldn't prove himself worthy of the blessing, then no other hope for these creatures remained, leaving Satan to experience a resurrection of status. At this point, Satan knew the cross was unavoidable, so instead of evading it, he embraced it as an opportunity to sabotage Jesus before God. Satan devised a scheme to make use of every human at his disposal. He had many pieces to move. God had only one. Satan had to find a way to make Jesus sin before he escaped to the grave, ensuring any hope of humanity died with him. Jesus had put up a firm resistance in the wilderness, so Satan knew what he was up against. He would have to attack from every angle, humiliate and torture him, strip him of all comfort to make it impossible for Jesus to remain perfect. While sharing his final meal with his beloved disciples, Satan entered into one of Jesus' companions to turn Jesus over to the chief priests. But before it even happened, Jesus announced this betrayal at the dinner table. He seemed prepared, but Satan would not be unnerved, because the torture had only just begun. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Christ was overwhelmed with emotion. Knowing he'd just been handed over to the devil, he begged God to find another way to redeem humanity. But deep down he knew, he was the final piece, the King of Kings. The future of mankind would be determined in the next 15 hours, and it rested solely on Jesus' shoulders. And with a simple kiss, Satan triggered the final temptation of Jesus. For the next 15 hours, he would be subject to a level of suffering never before experienced by man. Unfathomable agony on the physical, emotional, and spiritual level. These events would be later known as the Passion of Christ. Christ was arrested and taken to an illegal trial. His disciples scattered out of fear, and his best friend denied him 3 times. After a corrupt ordeal involving false witnesses and many deceptions, Jesus was convicted and sentenced to crucifixion. He was flogged and whipped, mocked and scorned. They dressed him in a purple robe and twisted together a crown of thorns, forcing it into his head. They took turns punching him, spitting on him and tearing out his beard. He was tossed into the open, where his own people formed a crowd encircling him. The leaders of the people choosing to worship their enemy's king. They hated Rome, but they hated God more. Jesus looked upon the very people he was there to redeem with sadness as they spat, mocked, and ridiculed their only redemptive hope. He carried his own cross to the mount where he was hung. Nails were driven into his hands and feet, pinning him to the wood and forcing his lacerated back to drag up and down the plank as he tried to grasp his next breath. While Satan was doing his worst, the earth cried out in agony as its maker was being slain. The sky became dark and the ground shook, but Satan refused to relent. He was so close to death, and yet Jesus hadn't opened his mouth against the Lord. Satan panicked. He started insulting the Son of Man, echoing his challenge in the wilderness. He saved others, let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one. If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself. Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. Satan was exposing humans in all their depraved wickedness before the God who had come to save them. And finally, Jesus opened his mouth. While bearing all the sin of mankind in his flesh, he gazed up to heaven, and seeing only darkness, he muttered, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Was that it? Was all the pain and suffering too much to bear? Did he finally turn away from God and curse him in his last moments? Did Jesus die in sin like the rest of mankind? Had Satan just won?